In the late 1970s, Detroit, Michigan was the site of unspeakable crimes.
4 children were abducted, held captive for days, then murdered.
Strangely, the victims were bathed and carefully redressed before they were dumped. I'm taking a fresh look at this horrific case, uncovering a secret history of pedophilia, questionable suicide, and a possible cover-up.
It's all about money and power. And how do you get to the bottom of it?
He was in hell.
It's not too late to bring the Babysitter Killer to justice. I'm M. William Phelps, best-selling crime author, and I have an obsession: serial killer, cold cases.
Now, nearly 10 years later, investigators say they still need the public's help.
For me, it's personal. My sister-in-law was murdered, and her killer has never been caught. These killers are still out there. Their victims deserve justice, and just one new clue could make all the difference. I don't have a badge, but I do have something the cops don't have. Someone who understands the dark mind of a murderer.
Boy, I'm telling you, nobody can hear her scream.
Because he is one. Over 13 months in 1976 and 1977, someone snatched 2 boys and 2 girls from the streets of suburban Detroit.
He held them prisoner for days, sexually molesting the boys before finally killing them. Then he left their bodies carefully washed and dressed to be discovered on area roadsides.
That's why people call him the Babysitter Killer. He's never been caught, so I'm taking up the hunt. But first, I'm meeting with criminal profiler John Kelly to learn more about the predator I'm chasing. This is one of the reasons why I don't write about kids. The worst kind of murder imaginable here.
The devil is alive and well in the suburbs of Detroit.
In his long career, Kelly has seen every kind of killer under the sun. But this case turns even his stomach.
This is sadistic. This is the worst of the worst. It doesn't get any worse than this.
Where do you begin with something this twisted? Maybe only the dark mind of another killer can make sense of it. Since 2001, Kelly has been developing a secret source who helps him decode criminal minds. He's a multiple murderer, serving back-to-back life sentences. Kelly's code name for him is 13. 13's insight has put other murderers behind bars. But with the Babysitter Killer, there's a catch. How does he feel about, child killers?
Oh, 13 really, really hates child killers. I mean, he loads child killers.
Isn't that wonderful? A serial killer who kills older individuals hating a serial killer who kills children. That's interesting.
That's the hierarchy of the prison system. The lowest rung in the prison system is the child killer.
I want Kelly to ask 13, why does this guy molest and murder his victims? Then bathe and redress them before dumping their bodies.
You've reached the state prison.
Please wait.
Okay, John.
Oak Park, Michigan, the serial killer up there. This guy killed 4 children. They're just objects to him, these kids. Yeah.
If he looked at those as children, I don't think he'd ever be able to harm them. They were just a piece of meat.
Okay.
Just another piece of meat.
Piece of meat for him to get sexually gratified?
To dehumanize them in such a way.
What he did is he washed them and he cleaned their clothes and he pressed their clothes and then he posed them to be found after he killed him. Again, he didn't try to hide the body.
Yeah, that's a lot of remorse.
Wait a minute. A killer with compassion?
He did this, he knows he's sick. He knows he can't leave alive because he doesn't want anybody to know that. That's it.
Is 13 correct? That the ritualized washing, dressing, and posing is a sign of remorse?
Well, you know, it was very surprising and even shocking for me to hear remorse come out of his mouth. These kinds of guys usually don't feel remorse.
If the babysitter killer does feel ashamed of what he's done, it still hasn't been enough to make him turn himself in. And that means more children are at risk. To pick up this killer's trail, I'm headed into the heart of the Midwest. 35 years ago, the auto industry here was booming. This was suburban bliss, where families lived out the American dream. You know, back in the 70s, this area, Little League games, pancake breakfasts at churches, PTA meetings, tag sales, kids walking around. Communities were close-knit, and people were optimistic about the future. And each day, the Stebbins family of Ferndale counted themselves lucky. No one suspected that February 15th, 1976, would shatter their dreams. 12-year-old Mark Stebbins was a quiet boy who collected toy soldiers and wanted to be a Marine. He was playing pool with his family at the American Legion Hall on a Sunday afternoon when he got restless and decided to walk home, just 3 blocks away. His mother told him to call when he got there, but she never heard from him again. After 4 long days, the news finally came that Mark had been found, dumped next to a shopping center. His body and his clothes perfectly clean. An autopsy revealed that he had been bound, smothered, and violated with an object. Over the next year, 2 girls and another boy were abducted and held captive for up to 19 days before they were killed. I'm here at the corner of Maple and Woodward in Birmingham, where the 4th victim, Timothy King, was abducted. I'm meeting with Don Stutt, who was a young police officer in the 70s, and James Ahern from the original task force. They tell me when Tim King went missing, everyone immediately feared the worst.
Based on the prior 3 cases, in my mind, it was something much more than a typical 11-year-old runaway. So I called our chief of police at the time, Jerry Tobin, and I said, we have a problem. In the meantime, he got together a lot of other area jurisdictions, including the sheriff's department. And by daylight, they had about 200 police officers and sheriff's deputies.
Wow. The search went into overdrive as police stopped cars and pedestrians at random. Even the public joined the hunt.
All the communities were totally involved. The citizens were helping the police.
Yeah, and you got to remember, too, in 1977, particularly in neighborhoods like ours in Berkeley and Ferndale, Royal Oak, kids walked to school. They left the house in the morning, walked to school, walked home at lunch. This really precipitated the whole beware of strangers mentality.
It was a time of trust and innocence. To me, that sounds like the perfect setting for a predator. But I'm wondering, this intersection was such a busy spot. Wasn't the killer worried about witnesses?
This is a high-traffic area, always has been for police officers. And, you know, with the stores, the drugstores, the restaurants, hotels, obviously frequented by hundreds of people all the time.
And he must have known that, our guy.
I would think so.
I want to know, does that mean this killer is overconfident, lucky, or just stupid? I'm meeting again with my profiling contact, John Kelly, to get his take on it.
Let me tell you, he's really taunting law enforcement. He's dumping these kids and posing them right under the cops' nose in affluent neighborhoods.
By posing, he means when a killer lays out bodies in a particular way. The Babysitter Killer smothered his victims, cleaned and redressed them, then posed them as though they had never been harmed.
In my mind, he's saying, here's your child back, better than when I got him.
But with one of the girl victims, the Babysitter Killer suddenly changed his pattern. Was he trying to send a message?
She was shot in the face with a shotgun.
I'm in Detroit, Michigan, trying to heat up the trail of the notorious Babysitter Killer. He's known to have killed 2 boys and 2 girls, but he's never been caught, and there could be more victims we don't know about. This case may be as cold as the killer's heart, but anyone touched by these murders will never be able to move on until justice is served.
Child Killer Task Force detectives want to look through the old film footage that Channel 7 may have from the days of the original investigation.
Reporter Heather Catallo is one of those people who can't let go. She's been covering the case for over 10 years. I'm meeting with Heather at the site where victim number 2 was found. A little girl this time. December 22nd, 1976, Christmas time in Royal Oak, Michigan.
Yeah, off to the park with some friends? Yeah. Hey, stop!
12-year-old Jill Robinson seemed in a hurry to leave the house. But why? Was she going to meet someone? The next day, her bicycle was found behind a hobby store on Main Street. Then, the day after Christmas, a driver heading out of town on the interstate spotted something by the road. A young girl lying on her side, fully clothed and still wearing her backpack. Then, the driver saw Jill's face. She had been shot at point-blank range with a shotgun. The other victims were smothered. I asked Heather Catallo why she thinks the killer shot Jill.
In all my years of covering this case, I've never really been able to get a really clear answer. Now, one thinking is, could she have been suffocated? Perhaps she wasn't all the way dead, and the killer panicked at the last minute.
Right.
Or something must have happened, because it was certainly very different from the other MOs with the other children.
Yeah, I mean, for me, even her being a female is very different for a guy who goes after pre-pubescent boys.
The killer's first victim was a boy, and usually child killers stick to one gender. But this guy's taking both.
At first glance, it doesn't seem to add up.
It really doesn't. He obviously molested the boys. The girls were not molested. And I don't know that anyone's ever really been able to explain that, but maybe the killer was acting really quickly, and did he not, with haircuts, was he not able to tell? I don't know.
Heather says the killer left clues for law enforcement.
All of the victims were left along busy roadsides. They were all north-south roads.
Wow.
So maybe it was ease of access. Maybe the killer was trying to tell police something.
So the killer, too, I think, and you pointed this out, no one has pointed this out to me, is trying to say many things. North-south, the time of day, the day of the week. The killer's talking to us.
It seemed like it. And they were listening, but they just couldn't figure it out, and still can't. And the other thing that they were really trying to figure out, and still, I think, was, did this person have the capacity, they must have, to hold the children for as long as they did?
Heather believes the killer must have had a secret location where no screams could be heard. And finally, in 2005, authorities zeroed in on a suspect who had exactly that. For legal reasons, I can't say his name or show his face. But at the time of the murders, he was an active pedophile who molested young boys in the basement of a neighborhood bike shop. His main hunting ground was Detroit's infamous Cass Corridor.
The Cass Corridor is sort of this area where a lot of not so good things happen. And apparently back in that time frame, there was quite a ring where pedophiles would hang out with kids, take pictures, that kind of thing with child pornography.
Police believe the man was at the center of this ring of child predators. And they soon found more reasons to suspect he could be the Babysitter Killer.
He apparently moved to Ohio in about 1978, which is after the murder stopped. So that sort of piqued people's interest.
Then, years later, he said something to a friend, also a pedophile, that he would live to regret, because the friend told the police.
He said, hey, doesn't this picture showing a picture of a child, doesn't this look like the King boy, or something to that effect? Now, not saying it was Timothy King, but something like that. And so, of course, then all the task force members started really going after this guy.
Why would he be talking about one of the Babysitter Killer's victims years after the murders? I want to learn more about this suspect, so I'm meeting with the cop who interrogated him, retired Michigan Police Sergeant Ray Anger.
I interviewed him for 3 hours. He confessed to all the kids that he molested.
How many?
There was at least a dozen. About what kid it was, what he did, and where he did it, and when he did it. He knew he was going to prison forever in Ohio. He was not getting out. He was gone.
Then, Ray made him an unbelievable offer. If he agreed to take a lie detector test about the Babysitter murders, he could get this special deal.
I told him, I says, I'm authorized to give you this deal. You can go to any prison you want in the United States under a different name, and no one will know who you are or why you're there. He says, I did not kill those kids or have anything to do with them.
The suspect pled guilty to the molestation charges only and received 3 life sentences. Did he take the truth about the murders to prison with him? It's a question Ray asks himself every day. This case is more personal to him than other cops. The killer's 3rd victim was a friend of his son's. 10-year-old Kristine Mihelich disappeared on January 2nd, 1977, just 1 week after victim number 2, Jill Robinson's body, was found.
Please, Mom, please, can I go?
It was right after Christmas. She just lived a couple blocks up the street. She wanted to buy a teen magazine.
But why not?
Can't cross over 12-mile road. It's too busy.
I'm not a baby anymore.
Her mother consented.
Okay.
She came up here. Mother waited for her return. She didn't come. Mom went to work, and still the daughter hadn't come home. Mom called a few of her friends. They hadn't seen her, and then she called the police.
When you first heard Ray, tell me what you're feeling.
It was not good. My feelings was just, we've lost another child.
Even 35 years later, the memory is unbearable. Kristine was missing for 19 days. 19 days of agony for those who loved her. 19 days of God only knows what for poor Kristine.
This community was in an absolute state of panic. You couldn't find a kid walking on this street anywhere.
So the normal course of innocence is interrupted.
Yes.
Dramatically. Was the Cass Corridor pedophile the Babysitter Killer? Me? I'm having doubts. Because that guy only went after boys. The babysitter took boys and girls. and I still don't know why. I need to talk to John Kelly again and see if his contact on the inside can help.
What am I going to get out of him if we sit down with him again and ask about this? Why boys and girls?
If you talk to 13 on this case, you're going to get feedback on a serial killer's experiences.
Last time, 13 said this killer sees his victims as nothing but pieces of meat to gratify himself with. But the girls weren't sexually assaulted. Can he explain that?
Okay, John.
2 boys and 2 girls. He sodomized the boys. Why do you think he took boys and girls?
Man, I don't know. It's tough because you don't know whether this guy is homosexual, bisexual, or what.
And why do you think he would sodomize them?
I don't know.
It seems crimes against children may be beyond 13's understanding. But then, Kelly asked him something I never expected.
Can you tell me about your childhood and the trauma in your childhood?
I grew up with a very strict dad. He had a very low threshold. If he'd get really upset, he'd come down with his belt and beat the hell out of us. Of course, I wasn't the nicest kid, and I was always getting into trouble.
How did that make you feel?
It hurts normal for us.
It was normal in your house?
Yes.
It was a normally abusive house.
That's it.
Where was Kelly going with that? And why does it matter that 13 was abused? What can that tell me about the babysitter killer?
Research bears it out that the majority of pedophiles were sexually abused as children. But also, research certainly bears out that the vast majority of serial killers were extremely abused as children.
Now I understand why Kelly turned the spotlight on 13. He thinks 13 and the babysitter killer could have something in common. They may both have committed violent crimes as a way of regaining the power they lost when they were abused themselves.
This guy, is he getting his fantasies met by having sex with the kids or killing them?
The fantasy encompasses the whole ritual from beginning to end. The abduction, the bondage, the torture, the murder, all inclusive in this guy's fantasy.
So both?
Both.
Kelly believes this killer gets one high from sodomizing the boys and another high from the kill, whether it's a girl or a boy. That could be why he's taking both genders. After the Cass Corridor lead proved the dead end, it would be the 4th victim's own family who eventually turned up a new suspect. But had the police already caught this guy and let him go?
He was cleared on the basis of that polygraph and got out. If he killed more kids, someone has a lot of explaining to do.
By January 1977, panic reigned in suburban Detroit. 1 boy and 2 girls had been abducted and murdered. Whose son or daughter would be next, and when? Parents told their children not to go anywhere alone. But 11-year-old Tim King was eager to visit the local drugstore. Now I'm here with Tim's family, his father, Barry King, and his brother and sister, Chris and Kathy, to hear what happened. They tell me, on March 16th, 1977, Tim borrowed 30 cents from his sister and left home on his skateboard without telling anyone. The family didn't waste any time before calling police.
At that time, sometimes they would wait 24 hours on a missing persons report, but the police were there immediately fanned out searching for him, as did members of the family.
The longest 6 days of their lives passed by until Tim was found.
11-year-old Timothy King was found dumped by the roadside in Lavinia, in neighboring Wayne County. His body was still warm. His clothes had been pressed and his fingernails were scrubbed.
The medical examiner also found abrasions on his wrists. His skateboard was placed carefully by his side. Like victim number 1, Mark Stebbins, Tim had been bound, molested, and then smothered. To the trained eye of a forensic pathologist, a body is a roadmap, one that can lead straight to the killer.
So, Doctor, you recognize that boy?
Yes, Timothy King.
So a meeting with Dr. Warner Spitz, the examiner who was called to the scene on that chilly spring day. Right away, Spitz noticed something odd, and it gave him his first piece of information.
There was a cat, a whitish cat, if I remember correctly, sitting on the boy. And the reason that the cat was there is because the body was still warm when the cat came, because that's why the cat sat on him, to be warm.
That told him that Tim hadn't been dead very long. Then he noted the familiar signature.
The clothing was clean. The clothing did not seem to be in any disarray. In fact, the body was clean.
And the other telltale mark of the babysitter killer.
There was some suggestion that there was sexual mutilation or sexual handling that does not belong in a little kid of 11 years.
Based on your experience, looking at this body, the sexual abuse, the way he was murdered, was this an experienced killer or someone who just panicked and killed maybe at the last minute?
No, this person was an experienced killer. This was in the open. And, you know, that also tells you something about how callous this murderer is. He's not afraid. He's gotten away with it with other cases.
Talk to me about that.
A less seasoned murderer would hide the body, would seclude the body, would have the body in an area where it's difficult to find, where there will be decomposition before you find the body, and then the medical examiner is at a loss what to do with a decomposing body.
Is this killer taunting the police and you?
He may well be. He's totally unafraid, waving it to the authorities, and they're unable to do anything because they don't know who he is.
Forensics confirms it. This killer is experienced. Spitz has added another piece to the puzzle. But it was no consolation to the King family. Barry King buried his son and began what would become a lifelong mission to find the killer.
For the next 30 years, literally 30 years, everybody who called me with a tip, I turned it over to the police. And we just left it up to the police to resolve this case.
But the leads ran cold.
Everyone kept thinking, well, the manhunt is so active, this case will eventually be solved. But for more than 20 years, they told us we have no credible leads, we have no credible suspects.
It's not going to be solved, basically, was the message.
On the 30th anniversary of the murders, the family talked to police about raising awareness through the media. Finally, the cops told them they had a solid lead on a suspect, the Cass Corridor pedophile.
So then they followed up and said, well, they did have a lead they thought was good. So they asked us just to wait a year or so until they could investigate and see if he was indeed the guy. So we agreed. We said, that's why we talked to you. We didn't want to impede anything.
But we know where that went. The suspect took jail time for molestation charges, but refused to talk about the murders. Another dead end. Then, in the summer of 2006, Chris King got a phone call. A family friend, a polygrapher, had heard a startling confession from a colleague. The colleague claimed he had polygraphed a suspect in Michigan in 1977, who he believed was the Babysitter Killer. It was just weeks before Tim was killed, and the suspect was let go. Had police hidden a suspect from the King family for 30 years? Tim's sister Kathy passed on the tip to a detective she trusted. Days later,
a detective called me and asked me if our family knew anyone by the last name of Bush who lived near our high school. And I said, no, that doesn't ring a bell, but I'll ask my family. Nothing rings a bell. I call my friend who's an attorney, and she goes on Ancestry.com and finds an H. Lee Bush who's got 4 sons, one of whom, Christopher Bush.
Christopher Brian Bush was the son of a wealthy General Motors executive and a 4-time convicted pedophile who lived near the King family. In February 1977, Bush and 2 friends were charged with forcing up to 75 boys to engage in sodomy, oral sex, and pornographic photo shoots. While in custody, Bush was polygraphed in reference to the murder of victim number 1, Mark Stebbins, but then released on just a $1,000 bond. His 2 accomplices went to prison. The Kings believe Bush's powerful family pulled strings to get him off.
He came from a rich family. Here's someone convicted 4 times of criminal sexual conduct with minors who's on the street.
After taking the polygraph, Bush went back into the community. 1 month later, Tim King was killed.
He was cleared on the basis of that polygraph and got out. If he killed more kids, someone has a lot of explaining to do.
The big question is, did Bush really pass the test?
Polygraphers have gone back and looked at that original polygraph test from 1977 to state police and said he did not pass that test.
Wow. Was there a miscarriage of justice? And where is Bush now? Dead by his own hand. He didn't leave a suicide note, but he left something else.
They find a drawing of a young boy who appears to be screaming in agony.
Christopher Bush, a man convicted multiple times of molesting children. Barry King is more convinced than ever that Bush had a hand in his son's murder.
I'm in Oakland County, Michigan, trying to catch up with the infamous Babysitter Killer. As I search for this villain, I'm lifting the cover on a secret history of pedophile activity in the community and re-examining 2 persons of interest in the case. One was part of a child pornography ring, a Cass Corridor pedophile. He's now in jail. The other, Chris Bush, was convicted 4 times of sex crimes against minors, but never served a day in prison. The King family believes Chris Bush was involved in the murder of their loved one, Timothy King. They passed on a tip from a friend to police and waited for them to act.
There's a year that goes by where the police say, just be patient. This is the best lead we've ever had. We have corroborating physical evidence. We might be having a press conference very soon where we will close the case.
But the family says meetings were canceled, and the Oakland County prosecutor would not respond to calls and letters. Tim's father finally reached boiling point.
I want to know who killed Tim, and I don't have that many years left.
In 2010, Barry sued for access to the case files under the Freedom of Information Act. And in 2011, he and his family received more than 3,400 pages of information. When he got to one page in particular, Barry's heart stopped. It was the suicide report for the man he believes killed Tim, Chris Bush. On November 22nd, 1978, a housekeeper showed up at Bush's house and couldn't get inside. So she called his brother, who called the police. They found Bush in his room, killed by a gunshot to the face. I asked Tim King's family what else was in the report.
And now, what do they find inside his bedroom?
They find bloody ligatures on the floor.
Could these have been the ropes used to bind Tim and the other boy victim, Mark Stebbins? Then, something even more chilling.
They find a pencil drawing of a young boy who appears to be screaming in agony, and it's taped on the wall of this man's bedroom.
But is it just any boy or a portrait?
Well, they thought that it resembled Mark Stebbins. The hood is up on this drawing, which is how Mark's body was found. So that's something the killer would have known, and that was not public information at the time.
So they called the task force right away, thinking this is a very solid suspect in the child killings.
So where did this new information lead police? And where is the evidence now?
So the drawing's still around, but the ropes have gone missing.
And there's no property report / receipt that would indicate what happened with those ligatures. Even if evidence is destroyed, they memorialize that, and they would keep that piece of paper, and nothing like that is in the file.
And with today's DNA, bloody ligatures, that could solve the case. If there's a match, you could solve the case instantly.
How could such vital evidence go missing? Was it part of a cover-up? Bush's suicide certainly casts a shadow of guilt over him. And the murder stopped after he died.
You know, one thing I've always shied away from in my career of writing is writing about kids who were murdered. And it's a simple reason. I walk up the steps of the mother or the father, the brother, the sister of that victim. And, you know, I've had someone in my family murdered, but there's no way I can compare that pain to losing a child that way.
Someone who lives that pain every day is Mike Stebbins, brother of victim number 1, Mark Stebbins.
Is that how you remember him?
Yes, it is. That was his very last, I believe it was his school picture. Yeah, that's how I remember him.
Mike remembers his brother walking out of the American Legion Hall so long ago.
I kicked myself in the ass because I should have went with him, and I wanted to stay and play pool. And it's been 35 years for me, and I can't forget. I try to go on with my life, but you know, you can't forget.
And then there's been this recent drawing. What do you think of that drawing?
I don't want to see that again. I know what I think of it, but I don't know if I should say it.
Say whatever you feel.
I believe that's a drawing of him being sexually assaulted. You know, when I first saw that picture, you know, if my brother went through that for 4 days, he was in hell.
These days, Mike says all he wants is an answer.
What would solving this case mean to you?
It would take a lot of, you know, gears turning in my head away, take the weight off my shoulders.
And what would you like to find out?
I want to know who's the perp.
If you could talk to him today, what would you say to him?
Tell us what you know.
Was Chris Bush Mark Stebbins' tormentor? The evidence suggests he was. But something's bothering me. What kind of killer draws a picture of his victim in agony, then cares for him afterwards by bathing him? It's almost like Jekyll and Hyde, or two different people. Is it possible Bush had a helper? I need to get Kelly's take on this.
I think it's very probable that there are two killers or a team, because when you look at the abduction, how easy it seems to be for these kids to be abducted. Two people at least are better than one. And also, we know that these children were held captive. Now, in their captivity, how could they be controlled by just one person?
And here's the thing. There's been another revelation, many years after the original crimes. In 2005, a hair was identified on the clothing of the third victim, Kristine Mihelich, but it doesn't match Bush. So, who does it belong to?
They had to have a lure in some way in order to get kids into their vehicles.
I've just learned that a suspect in the child murders of Oakland County, Michigan, was concealed by police for 30 years and only revealed in 2006 when one of the victim's family members received a tip from an insider. Chris Bush was a known pedophile at the time of the murders, and he committed suicide after the last victim was killed. I'm about to speak to someone who believes Bush may be guilty, but that he didn't work alone, and that an accomplice helped stage his suicide. Does she have proof? Erica McAvoy's sister was victim number 3, Kristine Mihelich. Kristine was held captive for 19 days. For Erica, that's the first clue that Bush had helpers.
This was not one individual who in fact committed these crimes. This had to be a group of people. You could not pull off abducting a child, holding her for 19 days, and only being the one person to know. You're gonna eventually talk to somebody. They're gonna know what you're doing.
Erica also believes Bush would have needed help abducting the victims.
Chris Bush was a slob. There is no way a child is going to go to him. They had to have a lure in some way in order to get kids into their vehicles.
Was it another child? Or a teenager, perhaps? Erica thinks so. She believes the hair found on her sister's clothes was left by a teen who knew Bush.
He would have been 15, 16 years old at the time. Who wouldn't go with a kid?
Erica believes she can name that individual. She also thinks Bush's suicide was staged, and perhaps that same person played a role.
What's the percentage of people who commit suicide and shoot themselves between the eyes? I said, how do you know he committed suicide or he was not killed?
And what answer did you get?
He said based on the suicide report that they were fairly certain that in fact he had committed suicide and there was no evidence to suspect any foul play.
No, please. Erica has handled guns throughout her life. So for her, the death scene only raised more questions.
We were flipping through the photos and the rifle was sitting on the bed there next to the body. And I questioned as to how and why he could actually shoot himself. Granted, he's probably 6 foot tall. Could he physically take that and shoot himself between the eyes? He probably could, but I think the likelihood of that, again, the percentage of it just does not add up.
And strangely, forensic tests found no gun residue on Bush's hands.
Not to mention a couple of years later when we actually saw a copy of Chris Bush's suicide report, it mentions one bullet being found in the head, but there were also 3 shell casings found in the room. But it does not mention, in fact, finding any bullets from those other casings.
And the incriminating ligatures and sketch? Possibly part of the setup, according to Erica.
Planted? Who says that someone didn't plant that there in order to draw the suspicion and point the finger at him to indicate that, in fact, he was the one?
The discovery of an unidentified hair in 2005 has reignited a case that many thought would never be solved.
And when they sent the clothes in 2005 to be re-examined by the Michigan State Police Department, they discovered this additional DNA. And that was when I first learned that, in fact, there was any sort of evidence that would give anything to link a living person or even a dead person at that point.
Could it be the crucial physical evidence that links the killer or killers with one of the victims? The wheels of justice are starting to turn again. Michigan State Police are taking the new evidence seriously. DNA from the hair has been tested against Erica's person of interest. And it's a match. Has law enforcement found the killer? I'm meeting again with retired police sergeant Ray Anger to see what he knows.
Apparently, Bush and he were friends, and the mitochondrial DNA matches him.
Ray makes an important point. The quality of the hair, after so long, made a perfect DNA match impossible. But it did give us mitochondrial DNA. What are your thoughts on mitochondrial DNA?
It's good, but it's not absolute proof. What it does is put you in the ballpark where the DNA that we are familiar with, it's like 1 out of 500 billion people, where the mitochondrial DNA says, okay, it's a certain percentage of this population.
Mitochondrial DNA narrows it down to 1% of the Caucasian population. Not close enough for police to make an arrest, but still, it's a huge lead. A grand jury has been established to review all evidence and listen to the tenacious families who never stopped demanding answers.
Now, new detectives are on the task force, and a grand jury is hearing testimony and examining evidence in the hopes of solving a case that still haunts so many families who are hoping for answers.
We can only hope police are finally closing in on the babysitter killer or killers. The families have waited a long time. They've shed too many tears, been frustrated beyond belief. It's time for the truth to come out.